A street dog carried a leaf to a bakery every single day. The bakery owner thought it was just a cute habit, maybe the dog's way of seeking attention or food. But one day, curiosity got the best of her, and she decided to follow him. What she discovered left her pale with shock. The morning sun cast long shadows through the frosted windows of Bennett's bakery, illuminating the worn wooden counters where Emily Bennett stood, her hands covered in flour. The aroma of freshly baked bread filled the historic building, a scent that had permeated these walls for generations. But today, like many recent days, the warmth of that smell seemed to mock the coldness of her empty shop. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Let us know which city you're watching us from. Stay tuned. Emily wiped her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of white powder across her forehead. The ledger before her told a story she didn't want to read, another month of declining sales. The emergence of chain stores in Salem had slowly eaten away at her customer base, leaving her family's century-old bakery struggling to survive. Running her fingers along the rough grain of the ancient counter, Emily could almost hear the echoes of bustling mornings past, when lines would stretch out the door and her grandmother would tell stories of the bakery's founding while handing out warm cookies to waiting children. Now, those memories felt as faded as the paint peeling from the shop's facade. A bell chimed softly as the door creaked open, drawing Emily from her reverie. She looked up, expecting to see Mrs. Henderson, one of her few remaining regular customers. Instead, she found herself staring into the deep brown eyes of a street dog, its coat dusty and unkempt. In its mouth, it carried a single green leaf. "Hey there," Emily called softly, uncertain whether to shoo the animal away or let it be. The dog's penetrating gaze held her still as it deliberately placed the leaf on her doorstep, sat down, and waited. There was something almost ceremonial about the action, as if the dog was making an offering. Emily found herself moving toward the door, drawn by the strange behavior. As she approached, the dog remained seated, its tail making small, sweeping motions across the floor. "You're quite the gentleman, aren't you?" she murmured, crouching down to examine the leaf. It was unlike any she'd seen before, deep emerald with unusual markings that seemed almost like writing. The mysterious visitor became a daily occurrence. Every morning at precisely 9 o'clock, the dog would appear with a new leaf, placing it carefully before sitting to wait. The locals began to notice, and soon the dog had a name, Buddy, and a growing following of curious onlookers who would stop by just to witness the peculiar ritual. Among these newfound visitors was Jack, a delivery man who seemed unusually interested in Buddy's behavior. "You know," he mentioned one morning while dropping off supplies, "I've seen him doing this at other places around town. Never takes anything in return, though. Just leaves his little green gifts and moves on." Emily found herself looking forward to Buddy's visits, even setting out water and bread for him. The dog's presence brought an unexpected warmth to her days, and she noticed that customers who came to see him often left with a purchase, a small bright spot in her struggling business. But everything changed the day Buddy brought something different. Instead of a leaf, he carried a small tarnished object that glinted in the morning light. Emily's heart quickened as she picked it up. An ancient coin, its surface covered in mysterious inscriptions that seemed to date back to Salem's earliest days. The discovery coincided with the arrival of a new customer, a well-dressed man who carried himself with an air of aristocratic authority. He ordered a simple coffee and scone, but spent an unusual amount of time studying the bakery's interior, his eyes lingering on the architectural details and ancient fixtures. "Fascinating place you have here, Miss Bennett," he commented, his voice smooth as honey, but with an undertone that made Emily uneasy. "Such history in these walls. One might say there are secrets waiting to be discovered." That evening, as Emily closed up shop, she found herself drawn to the bakery's dusty basement. Years of financial struggles had prevented her from properly exploring the space. But something about the coin and the stranger's words pulled her downward. In the beam of her flashlight, she noticed a loose board in the corner. Her hands trembling slightly, Emily pried it up, revealing a space beneath. There, wrapped in ancient cloth, lay a leather-bound book. Its pages were yellow with age, filled with elegant handwriting and drawings. As she began to read, Her eyes widened. These weren't just recipes, they were secrets. Family secrets that had been hidden away for generations. The last entry caught her attention. "To my descendants, what lies within these pages is more valuable than gold. But beware those who would steal our legacy. The truth of our family's treasure is hidden in plain sight, waiting for the one who can see with their heart." Emily closed the book, her mind racing. The strange dog, the mysterious coin, the elegant stranger. Suddenly, none of it seemed like coincidence. As she climbed the stairs back to the main floor, she could hear Buddy barking outside, an urgent sound that seemed to echo her own growing sense that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Looking out the window at the darkening streets of Salem, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled upon something much bigger than herself. The question was, who else knew about it? And more importantly, who could she trust? Her text message lit up her phone. It was Jack, the delivery man. "Need to talk to you about Buddy, it's important. Meet me tomorrow." Emily stared at the message, her finger hovering over the reply button. Something told her that answering this message would set in motion events that would change everything. In the distance, a church bell tolled 9 times, the same hour Buddy always appeared. As if on cue, she heard a scratch at the door. But when she opened it, instead of the usual leaf or coin, she found something that made her blood run cold. A piece of paper that looked remarkably like a map, with her bakery marked at its center. The ancient recipe book lay open on Emily's kitchen table, its pages illuminated by the soft glow of morning light. She had spent the entire night poring over its contents, discovering that what appeared to be simple recipes held layers of mystery. Between instructions for bread and pastries, there were cryptic notes, symbols, and references to ingredients she'd never heard of. "Add 3 drops of moonflower essence to enhance the dreams," one recipe read. Another spoke of herbs from the hidden garden, picked only during the full moon. Emily ran her fingers over the carefully penned words, wondering if her ancestors had been more than just bakers. In Salem's rich history, there had always been whispers of those who practiced ancient arts, healing through food and herbs. The bell above the shop door chimed, startling her from her thoughts. Jack stood in the doorway, his usual delivery uniform replaced by casual clothes. Something about him seemed different, more alert, more focused. "I see you found it," he said, nodding toward the book. Before Emily could ask how he knew about it, he continued, "I've been watching this place for months now. There's more going on here than you realize." Emily felt a flutter of unease. "What do you mean, and how do you know about this book?" Jack pulled up a chair, his expression serious. "I'm not just a delivery man. I'm an investigative journalist working on a story about historic family businesses in Salem. But what I've uncovered goes far beyond simple economics. There's a pattern of corporate takeovers targeting specific properties with histories like yours." As if on cue, Buddy appeared at the window, carrying something in his mouth. Emily hurried to let him in, and the dog dropped a small, rusted key at her feet. Jack picked it up, examining it closely. "Just as I thought," he murmured. "This is a master key, probably from the 1800s. These were used by the founding families to access communal storage spaces throughout Salem. But why is Buddy bringing these objects now?" Emily shared her discoveries from the recipe book, watching Jack's face carefully for reactions. When she mentioned the hidden garden, and his eyes lit up. There are rumors about a secret garden in Salem, preserved by the original settlers. Some say it contains rare herbs and plants thought to be extinct, but its location has been lost for generations. He paused, glancing at the map Buddy had brought the previous night. "Until now, perhaps." The elegant stranger chose that moment to appear, standing outside the bakery window. His reflection in the glass seemed to shimmer strangely in the morning light. Emily quickly covered the book with a cloth, but not before noticing his eyes fixed on it with an intensity that sent chills down her spine. He entered, the bell announcing his presence with an almost ominous chime. "Good morning, Miss Bennett. I trust you've had time to consider my offer." Emily blinked in confusion. "Offer?" The man smiled, reaching into his coat to produce an envelope. "My apologies, I represent Heritage Acquisitions. We've been admiring your establishment for some time. Inside this envelope, You'll find a very generous offer to purchase your bakery." Jack tensed beside her, and Emily noticed his hand move protectively toward the recipe book. The stranger's eyes followed the movement, his smile never wavering. "I don't recall putting the bakery up for sale," Emily replied carefully. "Not everything has a price, Miss Bennet, especially pieces of history as valuable as this one." His gaze swept the room, lingering on certain spots, as if he could see through the walls. "Take some time to think about it, but don't take too long. Opportunities like this tend to be fleeting." After he left, Jack pulled out his notebook. "Heritage acquisitions. They're behind 3 other recent purchases in historic Salem. All buildings with connections to the founding families, all with rumors of hidden treasures or secret knowledge." Emily opened the envelope. The amount offered was staggering, enough to solve all her financial problems and then some. But something felt wrong about it all. Why this sudden interest in her struggling bakery? She returned to the recipe book, this time paying closer attention to the margins. There, in faded ink, she found tiny drawings, flowers, herbs, and what appeared to be a map fragment. When she lined it up with the paper Buddy had brought, certain markings aligned perfectly. "Jack," she whispered, "I think these recipes are more than just instructions for baking. Look at these ingredients. Moonflower, our midnight sage. Dawn's first light captured in dew. What if they're actually directions?" "Directions to what?" Before she could answer, Buddy began barking excitedly. He ran to the basement door, pawing at it insistently. Emily and Jack exchanged glances before following him down the stairs. In the corner where Emily had found the recipe book, Buddy began digging at the dirt floor. Jack helped Emily clear away the soil, revealing another loose board. Beneath it lay a small chest, its surface covered in the same symbols that decorated the coin Buddy had brought. As Emily reached for it, she heard footsteps above, the distinct sound of expensive shoes on hardwood floors. The elegant stranger had returned, and from the deliberate way he moved across the floor above them, he knew exactly what he was looking for. Emily and Jack froze, holding their breath in the darkness of the basement, while Buddy stood guard at the stairs, his hackles raised, but silent. In that tense moment, Emily realized she had a choice to make, one that would determine not just her future, but perhaps the future of Salem's most carefully guarded secrets. The footsteps above grew louder, then stopped directly over the spot where Emily and Jack crouched in the basement. Emily clutched the small chest to her chest, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would give away their location. Jack placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, while Buddy remained perfectly still, eyes fixed on the stairs. "Miss Bennet," the stranger's voice floated down through the floorboards. "I believe I left my glasses case on the counter. Would you mind if I retrieved it?" Emily and Jack exchanged glances in the dim light. The stranger's tone was pleasant enough, but something in it reminded Emily of a cat purring before it pounced. After what felt like an eternity, they heard his footsteps retreat, followed by the gentle chime of the bell above the door. "He knows," Jack whispered, helping Emily to her feet. "He knows about the chest, about all of it. We need to move quickly." In the safety of her kitchen, Emily examined their discovery. The chest was made of dark wood, its surface covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shift in the light. The lock appeared impossibly complex, with multiple keyholes arranged in a pattern that reminded her of a constellation. The key Buddy brought, Emily suddenly remembered. Could it? Jack already had it out, studying how it might fit. "Look at these markings around the keyholes. They match some of the symbols in your recipe book." Emily quickly retrieved the book, laying it open beside the chest. "Here." She pointed to a page that appeared to be a simple recipe for herb bread. "These aren't just measurements, they're instructions for opening the chest. 3 turns toward the rising sun, 1 toward the setting moon." Following the cryptic instructions disguised as baking steps, they inserted the key into various holes in sequence. With each turn, the chest emitted a soft clicking sound, like gears moving within. Finally, with a sound like a gentle sigh, the lid popped open. Inside, they found a collection of dried herbs, each wrapped in parchment and labeled in the same elegant handwriting as the recipe book. Beneath these lay another map fragment, this one showing what appeared to be a garden layout, with notes about planting times and lunar phases. "This is incredible," Jack breathed, carefully examining each item. "These herbs, some of them haven't been seen in centuries. Botanists thought they were extinct." Emily was more interested in a small notebook tucked into the corner of the chest. Its pages contained what looked like a journal written by her great-great-grandmother. As she read, her eyes widened. "Jack, listen to this. The garden sustains us all, though few remember its existence. We are its guardians, as our mothers were before us, and their mothers before them. The knowledge must be protected, for in these plants lies the power to heal, to nurture, to bring joy through our baking. But beware those who would use these gifts for personal gain. They have tried before, and they will try again." A sudden noise from outside made them both jump. Through the window, they saw Buddy pawing urgently at the ground near an old oak tree in the bakery's small backyard. When they went to investigate, they found him digging near an ancient stone marker, almost completely hidden by overgrown grass. Carved into the stone was a symbol, the same one that appeared on both the chest and in the recipe book. As Emily brushed away decades of dirt, more symbols were revealed, forming a circle around what appeared to be a compass rose. "These aren't just decorative," Jack said, pulling out his phone to take pictures. "They're directions. Look, if you align these markers with the map fragments..." Emily laid out both pieces of the map they had discovered. When combined with the symbol on the stone, they formed a clear path leading from the bakery to somewhere on the outskirts of Salem. "The hidden garden," Emily whispered. "It must be. But why is all this coming to light now? Why did Buddy choose this moment to reveal these secrets?" As if in answer, Buddy barked once and took off running, still clutching one of the dried herbs from the chest in his mouth. Without hesitation, Emily and Jack followed him through the winding streets of Salem, past historic houses and ancient trees, until they reached a part of town Emily had never visited before. Here, the buildings gave way to overgrown lots and tangles of vegetation. Buddy led them to what appeared to be an impenetrable wall of vines and brambles, but as they watched, he squeezed through a nearly invisible gap, disappearing from view. Emily moved to follow, but Jack caught her arm. "Wait," he said, pointing to fresh tire tracks in the mud nearby. "Someone else has been here recently." Before they could decide what to do, they heard the sound of a car approaching. Ducking behind some bushes, they watched as a sleek black vehicle pulled up. The elegant stranger stepped out, but he wasn't alone. With him was someone Emily recognized, the CEO of the large chain store that had recently opened in Salem, the one that had been drawing customers away from her bakery. "The garden must be here," they heard the CEO say. "All our research points to this location. Once we acquire the Bennett property, we'll have all the pieces we need." The stranger nodded. "The other girl is proving more resilient than expected, but everyone has their price. And if not..." He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. What had started as a mystery about her family's legacy had suddenly become something much more dangerous. As she and Jack crouched in their hiding place, watching the two men examine the area, she realized she needed to make a decision, and quickly. Behind them, barely visible through the gap in the vegetation, Buddy waited patiently, still holding the herb in his mouth, as if he knew exactly what needed to happen next. As the elegant stranger and the CEO continued their inspection of the area, Emily's mind raced through her options. The herb Buddy held wasn't just any plant. She recognized it from her great-great-grandmother's journal. It was described as nature's key, a plant said to reveal hidden pathways when used correctly. Jack touched her arm gently, pointing to a narrow path that would allow them to circle around behind the men without being seen. Moving as quietly as possible, they made their way through the undergrowth until they reached Buddy's location. The gap in the vegetation was barely visible from this angle, but Emily could feel a slight breeze coming through it, impossible given the dense growth surrounding them. "We have to go in," she whispered to Jack. "Whatever they're looking for, we need to find it first." Jack nodded, his journalist's curiosity clearly piqued. "Ladies first," he smiled, helping her navigate through the narrow opening. What they found on the other side took their breath away. Instead of more tangled vegetation, They entered a hidden valley that seemed to exist in a world of its own. Ancient stone walls, covered in climbing roses and morning glories, created a natural enclosure. Neat paths wound between beds of herbs and flowers, many of which Emily had never seen before. The air was filled with a symphony of fragrances and the gentle humming of bees. "This is impossible," Jack breathed, taking in the scene. "This space doesn't exist on any modern map of Salem. It's like stepping into another century." Buddy trotted ahead of them, still carrying the herb, leading them deeper into the garden. As they walked, Emily noticed markers similar to the one in her bakery's yard placed at regular intervals along the path. Each one bore different symbols, corresponding to those in her recipe book. "Look at these plants," Emily said, stopping to examine a bed of silvery blue flowers. "These match the illustrations in the recipe book, moonflower, picked only under the full moon's light. My ancestors weren't just making bread, they were creating something much more special." A sound from beyond the hidden entrance made them both freeze. The elegant stranger's voice carried clearly. "The entrance has to be here somewhere. The Bennett girl must know something. She's been baking those special recipes recently, hasn't she?" "Yes," the CEO replied. "Our customers have been raving about them. There's something different about her bread. It makes people feel happier, more energetic. Some even swear it helps them sleep better at night." Emily's mind flashed to the recipes she'd recently tried from the old book. She'd assumed the unusual ingredients were just poetic descriptions, but now, Buddy led them to a small stone building near the center of the garden. Its walls were covered in the same symbols found throughout the garden and on the chest. The door was weathered but solid, with a familiar-looking keyhole. "The master key," Jack whispered, pulling it from his pocket. The lock turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting for them. Inside, they found shelf after shelf of dried herbs, carefully preserved seeds, and dozens of leather-bound books similar to the one Emily had discovered. But what caught their attention was a large tapestry hanging on the far wall. The weaving showed a scene of women tending this very garden, passing knowledge from mother to daughter. In the corners were symbols representing earth, air, fire, and water, with recipes woven into the borders. At the center was an image of bread being shared among people, their faces transformed with joy and health as they ate. "This is what they're really after," Jack realized, examining the tapestry closely. "These aren't just recipes, they're formulas for well-being. Your family wasn't just feeding Salem, they were healing it." Emily's fingers traced the familiar handwriting in one of the books. "The corporations want to mass-produce these recipes, don't they? To package and sell this ancient knowledge. But they can't," Jack said firmly. "Look at these instructions. Everything is tied to the lunar cycle, to specific times of day, to the energy of the person baking. It's not just about the ingredients, it's about the intention, the connection to this place." A loud crack from outside made them jump. The men were trying to force their way through the vegetation. Buddy growled softly, then nudged Emily toward a hidden door at the back of the building. "There's something else you need to see," Jack said urgently, pulling her toward the door. "Something I discovered during my investigation. Your family wasn't the only one involved in this garden. There were others, a network of Salem's founding families, all working together to protect these secrets." As they slipped through the door into another part of the garden, Emily's mind was spinning. The elegant stranger had seemed to know too much about her family's history, had been too interested in specific details about the bakery. "Jack," she said slowly, "I think I know who that man is. He must be connected to one of those other families." The sound of voices grew closer. Emily clutched the recipe book to her chest, looking around desperately for a way out. Buddy barked once, softly, and began pawing at what appeared to be a solid stone wall. "Emily," Jack said urgently, "whatever happens, these recipes, this knowledge, it belongs to everyone, not just to those who would profit from it. Your ancestors understood that. That's why they protected it for so long." As they heard footsteps approaching the building they just left, Emily made a decision. She knew what she had to do, but it would mean taking the biggest risk of her life and possibly changing Salem forever. Without hesitation, Emily placed her hand on the stone wall where Buddy was pawing. As she did, she felt a slight warmth beneath her palm, and the wall seemed to vibrate with a gentle hum. Her great-great-grandmother's words echoed in her mind. The garden recognizes its own. Suddenly, the seemingly solid stone began to shift, revealing a narrow passage. Emily and Jack ducked inside just as voices approached their location. Buddy followed, and the wall sealed silently behind them, leaving them in complete darkness except for the soft, phosphorescent glow of strange plants growing along the passage walls. "How did you know to do that?" Jack whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "I didn't," Emily replied honestly, "but something in the recipe book mentioned that the garden responds to those with Bennett blood. I just trusted." They followed the glowing passage, which sloped gently downward. The air grew cooler, and Emily could hear the sound of running water somewhere ahead. The tunnel opened into a circular chamber that took their breath away. The room was illuminated by shafts of natural light filtering through crystal prisms set into the ceiling. In the center stood a stone table, its surface carved with the same symbols they'd seen throughout the garden. Surrounding it were shelves carved directly into the rock walls, filled with ancient vessels, tools, and more books. "This must be the heart of it all," Jack breathed, examining the room with reverence. The place where the most important recipes were created and preserved. Emily approached the stone table, noticing that its surface was actually a map of old Salem, with the bakery and other locations marked by inlaid crystals. As she studied it, Buddy placed the herb he'd been carrying in a small indentation perfectly sized for it. The moment he did, the crystals began to glow softly. "Look at this," Emily called to Jack, pointing to the markings around the edge of the table. "These aren't just decorations, they're family names. Bennett, of course, but others too. Whitmore, Lancaster, Sullivan, Blackwood," Jack finished, his finger tracing the last name. "The same as our elegant stranger?" Emily's eyes widened with recognition. "Sebastian Blackwood. I remember my grandmother mentioning that name. Their family was once part of the garden's guardians, but they broke away generations ago. They wanted to use the recipes for profit rather than healing." A leather-bound journal caught her attention, newer than the others. Opening it, she found entries dated just 20 years ago, written by her mother. "Jack, listen to this. The Blackwoods have returned, seeking what they lost when they abandoned their sacred duty. They don't understand that the garden's gifts cannot be bought or sold. They must be earned, given freely to those in need." Before Jack could respond, they heard voices echoing from somewhere above, followed by the sound of moving stone. They had found another entrance to the passages. "Emily," Jack said urgently, "we need to make a decision. Those recipes, this knowledge, it could help so many people. But if it falls into the wrong hands..." Emily's mind raced. She thought of her struggling bakery, of the joy on her customers' faces when they tasted her recent creations made from the old recipes. She thought of her ancestors, generations of women who had protected these secrets while using them to help their community. Buddy whined softly, pushing something across the stone table with his nose, a small wooden box she hadn't noticed before. Inside, she found seeds, dozens of varieties, each carefully labeled in her mother's handwriting. With them was a note, "For the next guardian, when the time comes to renew the garden." The voices were getting closer. Emily could hear Blackwood giving directions. "The chamber must be down here somewhere. Everything we've been looking for will be there. The original recipes, the sacred seeds. With those, we can mass-produce these products, create a whole new line of authentic Salem remedies." Jack pulled out his phone, quickly photographing the stone table and its markings. "Whatever you decide, we need evidence of what they're trying to do. The public should know the truth about heritage acquisitions and their plans." Emily looked around the chamber, at the centuries of knowledge preserved within its walls. She thought of her great-great-grandmother's words about protection and duty, about using these gifts to help others. Then she looked at the seeds in her hands, seeds that could either die in corporate laboratories or flourish again in the light of day. She knew what she had to do, but it would mean changing everything, not just for her, but for all of Salem. As footsteps drew nearer to their sanctuary, Emily began quickly gathering specific items from the shelves, her movements guided by an instinct she didn't fully understand, but completely trusted. "Jack," she said, her voice steady despite the approaching danger, "I need you to help me with something. We're about to change history again, but first, we need to protect the heart of this garden. Buddy stood alert by her side, as if he too knew that the next few moments would determine the fate of not just the garden, but of a legacy that had endured for centuries. The real question was, would Salem be ready for what Emily Bennett was about to unleash? Emily moved with purposeful speed, her hands selecting items from the ancient shelves as if guided by an invisible force. Into her baker's apron pockets went small packets of seeds, carefully chosen herbs, and several folded pages torn from her mother's journal. Not the original recipes, but something equally valuable, instructions for awakening the garden's power. Whatever you're planning, we need to hurry, Jack whispered, still documenting everything with his camera. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by the sound of voices arguing about which passage to take. They don't understand, Emily said, her voice calm despite the urgency of their situation. The garden's power isn't in these rooms or even in the recipes themselves. It's in the connection between the land and its people. My ancestors knew that. It's why they shared their bread freely with the community. She approached the stone table one last time, placing her hands on its cool surface. The crystals pulsed with light, responding to her touch. "Jack, do you trust me?" He nodded without hesitation. "Completely." "Good, because what I'm about to do might seem crazy." She pulled out her phone and began rapidly texting. "Remember Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Rodriguez from the coffee shop? All my regular customers who've stuck with the bakery through everything. What about them? They're not just customers, they're part of Salem's heart, and right now, I'm calling them to action." Her fingers flew over the phone's screen as she sent message after message. "My grandmother always said the garden's true power lies in bringing people together." Buddy barked softly, his ears perking up at a sound only he could hear. Moments later, they heard Blackwood's voice, much closer now. "This way. The chamber's energy is strongest here." Emily finished her last text and turned to Jack with determination in her eyes. "Here's what's going to happen. In exactly 15 minutes, every small business owner in downtown Salem is going to unlock their doors. The morning market vendors are setting up early. The coffee shops are turning on their lights. The whole community is waking up. But why? Because they're all part of the garden's legacy, whether they knew it or not. Those recipes I've been baking, they didn't just make people feel good, they awakened something, a connection, a remembrance." She pulled out a small handful of seeds from her pocket. "And now, we're going to strengthen that connection." The stone door at the far end of the chamber began to move. Emily quickly pressed several herbs into Jack's hands. "Take these to Maria at the flower shop. She'll know what to do with them. Then get your story ready, the real story, not about some corporate takeover, but about how a community came together to preserve its soul. What about you?" "I'll be fine. The garden protects its own, remember?" She smiled, a hint of her ancestors, strength shining in her eyes. "Now go. Use the passage behind the north shelf. It leads to the old bell tower." As Jack slipped away, Emily squared her shoulders and faced the opening door. Buddy stood firmly beside her, no longer the scruffy stray, but every inch a guardian of ancient secrets. Sebastian Blackwood entered first, his elegant appearance somewhat disheveled from the tunnel exploration. The CEO followed, looking far less comfortable in the underground chamber. "Miss Bennett," Blackwood said smoothly, though his eyes betrayed his surprise at finding her there. "How nice to see you've discovered your inheritance, though I must say you're a few generations late to claim it." "I'm right on time, actually," Emily replied calmly. Above them, the first rays of dawn began to filter through the crystal prisms, filling the chamber with rainbow light. "And I'm not here to claim anything. I'm here to share it." Blackwood's smile faltered slightly. "Share it. My dear, you don't understand what you possess. These recipes, these techniques, they're worth millions to the right buyer. They're worth more than that to the right community," Emily countered. Through the crystals, she could hear the faint sound of Salem awakening above them. Footsteps on cobblestone streets, voices calling greetings. The early morning bustle of a town coming to life with purpose. "You're just like your grandmother," Blackwood said, his voice hardening. She refused to see reason as well. "The world has changed, Miss Bennett. People want convenience, mass production, easy solutions. No, Emily said firmly. People want connection. They want authenticity. They want to be part of something real. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a single seed, holding it up to the light. And that's exactly what I'm going to give them. The CEO stepped forward, reaching for his phone. We'll double our offer for the bakery. Triple it. Name your price. But Emily wasn't listening. Through the crystal-filtered sunlight, she could feel the pulse of Salem above them. Shopkeepers opening their doors, neighbors greeting each other, the community coming together just as she had asked. And in that moment, she understood exactly what needed to happen next. Buddy pressed against her leg, and she felt the weight of generations of guardians standing with her. The garden's power had never been in its secrets. It had been in its ability to bring people together, to nourish not just bodies but souls. As the morning light grew stronger, Emily Bennett prepared to show Salem and her ancestors that some traditions weren't meant to be hidden away, but to bloom in plain sight. The underground chamber hummed with tension as Emily faced Blackwood and the CEO. Through the crystal prisms above, the strengthening morning light cast dancing rainbows across the stone walls, and with each passing moment, the sounds of Salem awakening grew stronger. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Blackwood demanded, his composure slipping as he noticed Emily's calm confidence. Emily held up the seed she'd been holding, letting it catch the light. Did you know that every morning, for generations, the women in my family would bake bread with herbs from this garden? They didn't just sell it, they gave it away to those who needed it most. Children who had trouble focusing in school, elderly neighbors who couldn't sleep, new mothers struggling with anxiety. She took a step forward, and surprisingly, both men took a step back. But the magic wasn't in the herbs alone. It was in the connection, the sharing, the way it brought people together. Above them, the sound of Salem's old church bells rang out, their deep tones resonating through the chamber. Emily smiled, knowing Jack had reached his destination and set the next phase of her plan in motion. "You're living in a fantasy," the CEO scoffed, though his voice wavered slightly. "Modern consumers don't care about community. They want convenience, branded experiences, Instagram-worthy moments. Let's test that theory," Emily replied, reaching into her pocket for her phone. She turned it to show them her screen, filled with incoming messages and live social media updates. All across Salem, small business owners were opening their doors early, sharing stories of how the Bennett Bakery had touched their lives. Maria from the flower shop posted a photo of her new window display, featuring herbs that exactly matched those from the garden. The local coffee shop shared memories of Emily's grandmother, providing bread for their first opening day. Even Mrs. Henderson had gone live on social media, teaching her grandchildren how to bake using one of the simpler recipes Emily had recently revived. "You see," Emily continued, "while you were trying to buy the garden's secrets, I was sharing them. Every recipe I baked, every customer I served, every story I shared, they all became part of the garden's new roots." Blackwood's face darkened with understanding. "You've ruined everything. These secrets were meant to be controlled, marketed, branded. These gifts were meant to be shared," Emily corrected him. She walked to the stone table where Buddy still stood guard. "My ancestors understood something you've forgotten, Mr. Blackwood. True power doesn't come from hoarding knowledge. It comes from sharing it." She pressed her hand to the stone table's surface, and the crystals embedded within began to glow brighter. The map of old Salem etched into its surface seemed to shimmer, and suddenly new lines began to appear, connections between buildings, streets, and people that had always been there but had remained invisible until now. "What's happening?" the CEO demanded, staring at the illuminated map. "The garden isn't just this hidden place," Emily explained, her voice gentle but firm. "It's everywhere in Salem. Every windowsill herb garden, every flower box, every community vegetable plot. They're all connected to this source. And now, they're awakening." Through the crystals above, they could hear excited voices from the streets. Residents were discovering that their morning glory vines had bloomed out of season. Herbs thought dormant had sprung back to life. And flowers were opening in window boxes across town. Emily's phone buzzed with a message from Jack. "Stories going live in 5. Every major network picked it up. Salem's secret garden, how one community protected its heritage. She turned back to Blackwood and the CEO, who were watching their carefully laid plans crumble. "Your offer for my bakery? I'm afraid I'll have to decline, but you're welcome to come by during business hours. We have a new seasonal menu launching today. Community Roots. Every item made with locally grown herbs, every recipe adapted from my family's book, and every purchase helps fund Salem's new community garden program." Blackwood stepped forward, his face twisted with frustration. "You can't do this. These recipes, these techniques, they belong to the founding families." "Exactly," Emily agreed, "and the founding families belong to Salem. Just like this garden belongs to everyone who calls this town home." She reached into her apron and pulled out a handful of seed packets, "which is why I'm giving these to every family in Salem. The garden's not going to be hidden anymore. It's going to be everywhere." The CEO's phone began ringing incessantly, no doubt his board of directors seeing the viral stories about Salem's awakening garden and its connection to community resistance against corporate takeover. As the two men realized their defeat, the morning sun reached its perfect angle, sending shafts of crystal-filtered light throughout the chamber. In that illumination, Emily stood tall, every inch her grandmother's granddaughter, while Buddy sat regally beside her, his role as guardian now clear to all. The garden's secret wasn't in its hidden chambers or ancient recipes. It was in the way it connected people, nourished community, and helped love grow. And now, thanks to Emily's courage, that secret would bloom in the open for all to see. The following weeks transformed Salem in ways no one could have predicted. What began with Emily's bold stand in the underground chamber blossomed into a movement that touched every corner of the historic town. The Bennett Bakery, once struggling to survive, became the heart of a community renaissance. Emily stood at her shop window early one morning, watching as residents tended to the new herb gardens that lined the streets. Where there had once been empty planters and neglected corners, now flourished patches of greenery. Each garden contained cuttings and seeds from the original sacred garden, carefully distributed through Emily's network of local business owners. "You should see what's happening at the school," Jack said, entering the bakery with his usual delivery, though now his truck carried more than just supplies. Local newspapers had taken to calling him the Garden Chronicle for his ongoing coverage of Salem's transformation. "The kids have started a gardening club. They're using your grandmother's techniques to grow herbs for their families." Emily smiled, sliding a fresh cinnamon roll across the counter to him. The recipe, adapted from her family's book, now included herbs grown in the school's garden. "How's the story coming along?" "Going national next week," he replied, savoring the pastry. "But that's not why I'm here early. Have you seen today's sales figures?" Before she could answer, the bell above the door chimed. Mrs. Henderson entered, followed by a group of women Emily had never seen before. "Emily, dear," Mrs. Henderson called out. "These ladies came all the way from Boston. They read about your community garden program and wanted to see it for themselves." The visitors' eyes widened as they took in the bakery's transformation. Herbs now grew in carefully tended boxes along the windows, their fragrance mixing with the smell of fresh bread. The walls featured photographs documenting Salem's gardens, each telling a story of renewal and community. "Is it true," one of the women asked, "that you're teaching people how to use these traditional recipes in their own homes?" Emily nodded, gathering fresh herbs from the window box. "Every Saturday morning, we call it Garden to Table. People bring herbs from their home gardens and we bake together. It's about more than just recipes. It's about connecting with each other and our heritage." Jack pulled up the latest sales report on his tablet. "Speaking of connection, look at these numbers. The bakery's revenue has tripled since the garden program started. But here's the interesting part. So has every other small business in downtown Salem." Emily wasn't surprised. She'd seen it happening gradually, the way people lingered in shops, talking with neighbors they'd barely known before. The community meals that sprang up spontaneously in the town square, everyone bringing dishes made with herbs from their gardens. The weekly farmers' market had expanded to 3 days a week, with locals trading gardening tips alongside their produce. Buddy, now wearing a proper collar that identified him as the bakery's official mascot, trotted in from his morning rounds. He still made his daily visits to various shops, but now instead of bringing mysterious objects, he accompanied Emily as she delivered bread to elderly neighbors and taught gardening classes at the community center. "Oh, and you'll want to see this," Jack added, pulling up another article on his tablet. "Remember Sebastian Blackwood?" Emily's expression tightened slightly at the name. After their confrontation in the chamber, Blackwood and the CEO had retreated, their plans for corporate takeover thoroughly thwarted by the community's unity. "He started a foundation," Jack continued, showing her the article, "dedicated to preserving traditional knowledge and supporting small businesses. Apparently, your stand inspired some soul-searching. He's even offered to fund community garden projects in other historic towns." The bell chimed again as Maria from the flower shop rushed in, her arms full of blooms grown from the garden's seeds. "Emily, you won't believe what happened this morning. Remember those rare flowers we thought were extinct? They're blooming, all across town, in every garden that used your family's seeds." The visitors gasped as Maria laid out the flowers on the counter, delicate blooms in colors that seemed to shimmer in the morning light. Emily recognized them from the illustrations in her family's book, but seeing them alive and thriving was something else entirely. "That's not all," Maria continued excitedly. "The community center called. They want to expand the garden program to include after-school activities. And the Historical Society. They want to create an exhibition about Salem's gardening heritage, featuring your family's story." As Emily looked around her bustling bakery, she felt the presence of generations of Bennett women smiling down on her. The secret garden hadn't been lost. It had been waiting for the right moment to spread its magic throughout the entire town. A young girl peered through the window, pointing excitedly at the herbs growing there. Her mother, carrying a garden trowel and wearing soil-stained gloves, smiled and waved to Emily before guiding her daughter inside. "We were hoping," the mother said shyly, "that you could teach us about the moonflowers. They've just started blooming in our garden, and we want to learn the proper way to tend them." Emily caught Jack's knowing smile as she reached for her apron. This was what her ancestors had protected for so long. Not just the plants themselves, but the way they brought people together, creating connections that would last for generations to come. The autumn air carried the mingled scents of cinnamon, herbs, and possibility as Emily prepared for what would become Salem's first Garden Heritage Festival. 6 months had passed since the morning she'd stood up to Blackwood in the underground chamber, and the town had blossomed in ways no one could have imagined. "The last booth is set up," Jack announced, entering the bakery while adjusting his press badge. As the festival's official chronicler, he'd been instrumental in organizing the event. "You won't believe how many people are already lining up outside the town square." Emily looked up from where she was arranging special edition herb breads, each made with ingredients grown in different community gardens throughout Salem. "How are the other vendors doing?" "Maria's flower display is stunning. Those rare blooms your family preserved are the centerpiece. Mrs. Henderson has her herb-infused honey ready, and that new tea shop is showcasing blends made entirely from local gardens." He paused, checking his notebook. "Oh, and you'll never guess who just arrived." Before he could continue, the bakery door opened, and Sebastian Blackwood stepped in. He looked different from the elegant but threatening figure of 6 months ago, humbler somehow, though no less dignified. In his arms, he carried a leather-bound book. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice lacking its former arrogance. "I hoped I might have a word before the festival begins." Emily exchanged glances with Jack, who nodded reassuringly. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood. Would you like some tea? We're trying a new blend made with herbs from the school's garden." Blackwood accepted the cup with genuine appreciation. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since our last encounter," he began, "and a lot of research. This book belonged to my grandmother." He placed it carefully on the counter. "I believe it belongs with your collection now." Emily opened the volume carefully. Inside were detailed drawings of the garden as it had existed generations ago, along with notes about the cooperation between Salem's founding families. "This is incredible," she breathed, recognizing names and places she knew from her own family's records. "My grandmother was the last Blackwood to understand what your family always knew, that the garden's true power lay in sharing its gifts." He sipped his tea thoughtfully. "I forgot that. lost in dreams of corporate success and personal profit. But watching what you've done here in Salem, you've restored more than just plants and recipes. You've restored faith. Through the window, they could see the festival taking shape. Colorful booths lined the streets, each representing a different aspect of Salem's gardening heritage. Children ran between displays, their faces painted with flowers and herbs. The whole town seemed to glow with an inner light that had nothing to do with the autumn sun. Buddy, who had been dozing in his special corner of the bakery, suddenly perked up his ears. Moments later, the door chimed again as Maria burst in, her eyes bright with excitement. "Emily, you have to come see this. The moonflowers, they're blooming." "But it's daytime," Emily said, confused. Moonflowers traditionally only bloomed at night. "Exactly, it's never happened before. They're all opening, every single one in town, at the same time." The four of them hurried outside to witness the impossible. All along the streets, the pearly white blooms were unfurling their petals in the autumn sunlight. Visitors to the festival stopped to stare in wonder, while longtime residents whispered about magic and renewal. "It's like they're celebrating with us," Maria whispered, touching one of the delicate flowers. Emily felt tears in her eyes as she remembered her grandmother's words. "The garden knows when it's time for change. When the old and new can finally bloom together." Blackwood cleared his throat, clearly moved by the display. "Miss Bennet, Emily, I have a proposition for you. Not a corporate takeover this time," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "The foundation I've started. We're looking to create a network of community gardens across New England, traditional knowledge preserved and shared, just as your family has always done. Would you consider being our advisor?" Before Emily could respond, a commotion near the town square caught their attention. The festival's opening ceremony was about to begin, and the mayor was calling for Emily to take the stage. The crowd that had gathered was far larger than anyone had expected. Visitors from all over the country, drawn by Jack's stories of Salem's Renaissance. As Emily made her way to the podium, Buddy trotting faithfully by her side, she saw faces both familiar and new in the audience. There were the regular customers who'd stuck with her through the hard times, the children who now tended their own herb gardens, the business owners who'd become more like family than neighbors, and there, at the edges of the crowd, she could almost imagine she saw the spirits of her ancestors, nodding in approval. The garden's magic had never been meant for just one family or one purpose. Like the moonflowers blooming in daylight, it was about breaking boundaries, challenging expectations, and proving that with enough love and dedication, impossible things could happen. Standing before the microphone, Emily Bennet prepared to tell her town's story, not just of the past 6 months, but of generations of wisdom, of community bonds strengthened through shared purpose, and of the magic that happens when people choose to grow together rather than alone. As Emily stood at the podium during the Garden Heritage Festival, the unusually blooming moonflowers casting their ethereal glow across the gathered crowd, she felt the weight of generations of Bennet women standing with her. The morning sun painted Salem's historic streets in warm autumn colors, while the herb gardens lining the square released their healing fragrances into the air. "A year ago," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the hushed crowd, "I thought I was watching my family's legacy fade away. Our bakery was struggling, our traditions seemed outdated, and our secrets remained hidden underground." She paused, smiling at the knowing looks from those who had been part of her journey. "What I didn't understand then was that some things need to appear lost before they can be truly found." In the front row, Jack sat with his camera ready, documenting this moment for his final article about Salem's transformation. Beside him, Mrs. Henderson wiped away happy tears, while Maria beamed proudly, her arms full of impossibly blooming flowers. Sebastian Blackwood stood at the edge of the crowd, his grandmother's book clutched respectfully to his chest. "Our garden was never meant to be a secret," Emily continued, gesturing to the thriving community plots that now dotted the town. "It was meant to be a seed, waiting for the right moment to spread its magic throughout our community and beyond." As if in response to her words, a gentle breeze swept through the square, carrying the petals of the moonflowers upward in a dancing spiral. Children in the crowd gasped with delight, while their parents exchanged knowing smiles. Today, as we celebrate Salem's first Garden Heritage Festival, We're not just honoring our past, we're planting the seeds of our future. Emily revealed a small packet of seeds, similar to the ones that had started this journey. These came from our original garden, preserved by my family for generations, but unlike before, these won't be hidden away. Today, every family attending this festival will receive their own seeds, along with the knowledge of how to tend them. The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause. Emily caught sight of the school children who had started the gardening club, now teaching younger students about herb cultivation. Nearby, the local restaurants proudly displayed dishes made with community-grown ingredients, while artists showcased works inspired by the blooming transformation of their town. But this is more than just Salem's story, Emily continued, nodding to Sebastian Blackwood. Thanks to the newly established Heritage Garden Foundation, our community garden program will be replicated in towns across New England. Each community will receive seeds from Salem's gardens, along with the knowledge and support needed to create their own unique botanical heritage. The crowd erupted in cheers as Emily unveiled the foundation's first initiative, a series of apprenticeships that would bring young people from different communities to Salem, where they would learn the ancient gardening techniques and baking recipes before returning home to start their own programs. Buddy, who had been sitting regally beside the podium, suddenly stood and trotted to the edge of the stage. Following his gaze, Emily spotted a young girl watching the proceedings with intense interest. In her hands, she clutched a familiar-looking leaf, the same type Buddy had first brought to the bakery's doorstep. And so, Emily concluded, her voice full of emotion, what began as one family's secret has become a community's treasure. What was hidden has bloomed in the light, and what was once lost has been found in the hearts and gardens of everyone here. As she stepped down from the podium, the festival burst into full swing, the air filled with music, laughter, and the mingled scents of herbs and freshly baked bread. Emily made her way through the crowd, stopping to share gardening tips with visitors, exchange recipes with fellow bakers, and thank the countless people who had helped make this transformation possible. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, Emily returned to her bakery. The shelves were empty, every loaf of special festival bread had sold out, but the window boxes were full of thriving herbs, their leaves catching the last golden rays of daylight. On her counter sat the stack of books that told her family's story, her grandmother's recipes, her mother's journals, and now Sebastian Blackwood's family chronicle, all united at last. Buddy lay contentedly in his corner, watching as Emily began preparing the dough for tomorrow's bread. The recipe was one from her family's book, but now she didn't have to make it alone. Through the window, she could see lights coming on in kitchens across Salem, where other bakers, professionals and amateurs alike, were creating their own versions of the traditional recipes, each adding their unique touch to the legacy. The garden's magic had never been in the secret recipes or hidden chambers. It had been in the simple act of sharing knowledge, sharing food, sharing community. As Emily worked, she could feel the presence of all those who had come before her, not as ghosts of the past, but as guides showing the way to a future where ancient wisdom and modern community could bloom together. And every morning, as the sun rose over Salem, visitors would still find Buddy sitting faithfully by the bakery door. But now, instead of bringing mysterious objects, he greeted each person who came to share in the garden's gifts, his wise eyes seeming to say that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, they're meant to be shared. One seed, one loaf, one person at a time. Just as Emily's story bloomed and spread throughout Salem, we hope this tale has planted seeds of inspiration in your own heart. Like the magical garden, stories have the power to transform communities and connect people across distances. If Emily's journey touched your spirit, remember that you're now part of this growing community too. Subscribe to our channel to discover more enchanting tales that celebrate the power of tradition, community, and positive change. Leave a like if you believe in the magic of sharing stories, and join our growing garden of storytellers in the comments below. A special playlist of similar heartwarming tales awaits you. Just click the link to your left. There, you'll find more stories that remind us how communities can bloom when people come together to preserve and share their heritage. Remember, like Emily's garden, Our collection of stories grows more beautiful with each person who joins our community. We look forward to sharing more magical moments with you.